Hi, what's up? In the last two videos, we created a nice little product presentation. First, we took care of the lighting, and then we fine-tuned the plastic materials. This video will be more about some technical stuff in Blender, useful not only for product visualizations. Here are the topics I will be covering: parenting objects, the transform modifier, instancing using empties, the array modifier and instancer meshes, and random variations using animation nodes. We have quite a bit of content to cover, so let's get started. Okay, first let's look at parenting. What is parenting? Well, basically it's creating a hierarchy of individual objects. So in this simple scene here, I have this pill bottle, I have a sticker and the cap. Also have a ground plane and this back plate here. You might be familiar with this studio setup from my last two videos. And right now, these three objects are just individual objects. I can move, rotate, and especially with a product like this, it makes sense to parent the cap and the sticker to the main body. And let me just show you what for and why and how. So first of all, how do we parent stuff? Right here we can see we have this collection. There's the bottle, there's the cap, and there's the label. There's no relationship really between the label, the cap, and the bottle. So first up, we select the label, then we shift select the cap, and then lastly I select the bottle, and then I hit Ctrl P and select set parent to object. So now when we look over here, we have the cap and the label underneath the bottle. I can still go to the cap and move it or rotate it. I can still go to the label and move it or rotate it. But if I take the bottle, which is now the parent, and I move it, the cap and the label move along with it, also rotating and scaling. So now we have this relationship that the bottle is the parent, cap and label are children. There are some other advanced features in Blender where the parenting or the parent relationship can be used for some advanced stuff, like for example instancing. So for example you could create a mesh and then instance another object that is a child of that mesh on each vertex or face. Okay, so now we have this parented. Why did I take the bottle? Well, because I think it makes the most sense, right? The sticker is on the bottle, so if I move the bottle, the sticker should move with it, also the cap. Of course, you can say, I want the bottle to be parented to the sticker because the sticker is probably the easiest to select in the viewport. That's also fine. You do whatever you think is good for you or your workflow. Okay, so now we have the cap and the sticker parented to the bottle, but there's still individual objects. I can still take the cap, move it, place it on here like this. And now when I take the bottle, the cap moves along in its new sort of position. So let me just undo this quick. Right now for this tutorial, that's all we really need to know. We can create a hierarchy of objects by parenting. Again, you select the child objects first, then the parent object last. Then you hit Ctrl P and that's it. You get this setup here. If you want to unparent or if you want to take this relationship away and make the cap its own thing again, not a child of the bottle, you select the cap, hit Alt P and clear parent. Now the cap is outside here again. If we want to put it back under the bottle, we shift select the bottle. The active selected object, which is always the last one that select, will be the parent. So that's already what we want. Ctrl P, parent to object, and the cap is in here again. Okay, now the next thing I want to talk about in this video is how can we temporarily transform our object to a new location. For example, what if I wanted to add a carton, a box that maybe this pill bottle comes in into my scene here and place it behind it, and then I want to move the bottle over to the left a little. So let's quickly create a box for this bottle. Okay, I'm not going to texture this because you get the idea. Maybe place it back here. Now for a nice composition in my final square image, I would want to move my bottle over on the x-axis a little, right? Kind of makes sense. This is underneath my ground plane now. So maybe do this like that. Okay. Of course I can take the bottle now and move it on the x-axis and create a nice composition over here. Now that's fine. I can give this a quick render, save out the file, and then maybe just to be back to my default setup, I would have to take out this X location here, set it back to 0. So every time I want to render this image or give it a quick render, I would have to remember what this X location was. So I can go back, maybe I need to change a material or something. I need to render this setup quick again. I need to know where it was. Now, of course, I could go in and duplicate the bottle, the cap, and the label, and then place it over here where I want it for this kind of shot. But then I have the object in my scene multiple times, you know, because what if I have another setup where the bottle needs to go over to the right a little? So I have 3 positions. I would have 3 bottles, 3 caps, 3 labels. I really don't want that. I don't want to mess up my outliner here. And it's also not necessary. Of course, we don't have to really copy the mesh. We could just instance it. But still, I don't want all these objects in here just so I can render out this setup quick. So how can we do that? Well, first of all, let me reset the location of the bottle. Now my first thought was, well, maybe there's a modifier for the translation. But you can see there isn't. Then my second thought was, well, there's this delta transform here. Wouldn't it be nice to just move it over a little and then have a checkbox to have delta transform on and off? Well, there is no such checkbox to switch on or off the delta transform, so it's basically the same thing as up here. I would have to remember the X location. This delta transform is mostly useful for animations. So this is not a solution, but there is a solution. So let me just add in, of course, you guessed it, an empty plain axis. Now, where's my empty? Oh, I have to switch on the extras here so I can see my empty. There it is. Now the trick here is to go in here and add an object constraint, which is like a modifier, which you can switch on and off, which is what and that's exactly what I want. So I take a copy transform object constraint, set the target to my empty, right? How can I set the target to my empty? Maybe I should call this empty bottle left in front of box. Target is bottle left in front of box. Oh no, whoopsie, other way around. I have to take the bottle, add the constraint, copy transform, take the bottle left in front. And now I take my empty, and if I move my empty, the constraint takes care of moving the bottle along with it, and the parenting of the cap and the label takes care of moving the cap and the label along with it. So now on the bottle here, I basically have a switch that I can call bottle left in front of box as well. And by switching on this little eyeball icon here, I can switch the position to the left and to the right. Really quickly and easily without having to remember any locations whatsoever. Let's say I have another setup where I have another box on the left, just as an example. Switch off this one. Again, I create a new empty plain axis. I take this, add a copy transform. Also name this empty bottle right in front of box. Okay, now let's take bottle right in front of box. And when I take this empty, move it over to the right. Now I have this set up, and just by switching on and off these constraints, I can simply move my bottle to preset positions in my scene. This also, of course, let's take this one, works with scaling. So I'm scaling the empty here. So I can create a different scene with a smaller bottle. And of course rotation. I'm rotating the empty, and the constraint here takes care of scaling, rotating, and translating my bottle. And like I said before, this parenting relationship here takes care of taking the cap and the label with it. So that's it for storing positions that you can then simply switch on and off with the object constraints here. I switch this off, I hide the box, and I'm back to my original scene. Next thing I want to show you is how can we get 2 or 3 or more bottles into our scene. Let's say this is an image for an online shop, and maybe there's a 2-pack or a 3-pack. Of course, again, we can go select our 3 objects. First of all, I'm gonna hide the extras. We can select all 3 objects. We can duplicate them and position them. And then we have all these bottles, caps, and labels in here, which again, I really don't like or don't want. So of course there's a better solution. I go into my scene collection. I will create another empty. Maybe this time I take a sphere. I have to switch on the extras again. So this is my empty now. The empties have their own settings down here. So this is a sphere. It has a size, which is just a size that it shows up in the viewport here. I can make it a little smaller. And then we have instancing here. And we can instance another object or even an entire collection of objects to the location, rotation, and scale of this empty. So first of all, I will have to put my bottle in its own collection, because in this collection I also have the cube, I have the light here, the camera. So I click on this collection, create a new one, call it complete bottle 1 or something like that. Then I take my bottle and simply drag and drop it in here. And we can already see something happened here. The bottle knows that the cap and the label are children, but the cap and the label are not inside of this collection because I only dragged the bottle in. That's one thing we always have to remember with this parented relationship, that the objects are still individual objects. So we take the cap and the label and also drag it into our complete bottle 1 collection. Now I can go back to this empty here. I can instance a collection. Which one? Well, the complete bottle 1. And now I take this empty and move it on the x-axis, and I can simply place another bottle right beside it. Okay, so of course I would have to change my camera perspective. And now, let's say I want a third bottle, or you know what, I'm gonna move it in the back here and look through the camera. Let's really make an image for an online shop of a 3-pack. I take the empty and I shift D it. I'm duplicating the empty, not the bottle, not the cap, nothing, just the empty. I'm placing another one here. Since I duplicated, it also knows that I want to instance my complete bottle 1 collection. So now I have 3 bottles in my shot. And with the eyeball and of course with the renders toggles here, I can show and hide the bottle. And even if I go in now and I modify this cap, of course everything is instanced and inherited to all 3 bottles. So that is also another reason why you never want to duplicate your objects. If you just want more of them, you always instance them. Now again, I can go in here, select this empty here, and maybe rotate it a little so that the bottle on this side here shows the label this way, and on this one I rotate this way so we see that side of the label. You get the idea. We can instance an entire collection with or onto an empty, and then that entire collection, whatever is in there, the bottle, the cap, the label, everything is duplicated or instanced, and we can position them, we can scale and rotate and all of that. Okay, now this might be fine. We can even do a 4th one, rotate it 90 degrees. Go in here, maybe lay it on top across of our products here, like this. Now we would have to move the camera, maybe duplicate the camera, do another setup for a 4-pack. You know, something like this. Can still go in here and rotate this bottle that way to show the label up here. So this is very, very handy for creating perfectly manually placed duplicates or instances of our original bottle. And we still only have 1 bottle, cap and label in our entire scene. Everything else is just empties that we can simply hide. Okay. Now, what if we wanted to do more than just 3, 4, 5 objects? What if we wanted an entire matrix, like an entire box of bottles? Well, you probably have heard of the array modifier. So let me just take my bottle here. Maybe go to a different view here. And we go to the modifiers. We add an array modifier. Set the X to 1.1 so we get a little bit of a spacing in between, and then maybe turn it up to 5. So now we have 5 bottles, all perfectly aligned on the X-axis. Again, here we see that the parent relationship does not mean that the cap and the label are part of this object. They're just parented to the object. And really, we're only putting an array modifier onto the bottle. So we have 5 bottles, but only 1 cap and 1 sticker. Of course, again, we can go ahead and combine these 3 objects into a single one. You know, join them together with Ctrl-J. Then we have the sticker, the bottle, and the cap all inside of one mesh. I don't want to do this. So really the only solution here would be to take another empty and then put an array modifier onto an empty. But if I select one of my empties here, whichever one, doesn't matter, you can notice here there are no modifiers for empties. So we can create an array of empties with an array modifier. Okay, one solution would be to add a real mesh, like a plane, and scale that down quite a bit. Also, maybe I want to switch on my transparent view up here so I can see through stuff. Now I have this tiny little square down here. I put an array modifier onto, not a bevel, an array modifier onto this little square. Turn that up to 5. Turn the relative offset up to something like this. Okay, next I need to put I have to parent the bottle to the plane. So again, select the bottle, then the plane, Control P, set parent to object. Now my bottle is underneath of the plane. So we have this hierarchy here now. Now I can go to the plane and say, hey, instance my children, which is the bottle, on every face that that there is. Let me just go back to the bottle quick and remove this array modifier. And now look at this. We have 5 bottles, including the cap and the label. So what's happening here? We have this tiny little plane down here. With the array modifier, I make 5 of these little planes out of my one plane. And my plane, that little square, instances all of its children on each face. Since it's a square, it only has one face, and the normal is pointing up. So I have an instance of the bottle, which is the children, the child here, on each of the little squares. And since the cap and the label are children of the bottle, I also get instances of the caps and the label. Now all I really have to do is go to my plane, maybe add another array modifier, this one going on the Y, turn up to 5, and go to side view, maybe turn this up like this, and now I have a perfect set of 25 bottles. I can move, I'm moving the plane, by the way, not the bottles. I can move them like this, and now I have a perfect set with cap and label. Okay, this looks really cool. I like this, but there's one thing I don't like, and that is there is no randomization going on here. They're all perfectly aligned. So if we look at everything from top view, they're perfectly aligned, and they're all rotated perfectly in the same direction. So if this were a real set of 25 bottles in real life, they wouldn't be this perfectly aligned. So next thing I really want is some random, maybe some random positioning, you know, maybe shift it a little bit on the X and the Y. And I want a little bit of a random rotation so that it looks real, so that it looks like somebody actually took 25 bottles and placed them onto this ground plane. Now there is a little bit of a trick that we can do with our array modifier, since we now have these 25 little squares. We can actually add a displace modifier, then create a texture, for example, a cloud texture. Now look at this mess, this looks kind of cool. And we can set the direction of our texture to be global Y. Okay. So now we're displacing, we have to look at the squares here. So we're kind of messing up the squares with this displace modifier. And by setting this to global space and direction Y, they're still standing on the ground. If we look at them from front view and also from the side view here. But since we're messing up the normals of each of these squares, we now get a little bit of a random rotation that you can see here. See, this one is more facing this way and this one is facing this way. So we get a little bit of a random rotation. And that is a trick that we can basically only do because we have those little squares that are instancing the bottles. And the problem with this is that when we turn up the strength here too much, then things start to mess up because, for example, this square here is so messed up now from the displacement that the normal of the little square actually flipped to point downwards. So now we have some bottles pointing downwards, which is kind of interesting. Also, I just noticed that now the caps are floating up here and the model is down there. So this method here has its limitations, and instead of that we get to the last part of this video, which is using animation nodes to randomly place and rotate the bottles to make them look more real. Animation nodes is one of the coolest plugins in Blender. If you've never heard of it, maybe you're interested in it. I have a bunch of videos on my channel about animation nodes, but you can visit crispy.zone for the list of videos and information about animation nodes. Now, this might be overkill for just placing a bunch of bottles and randomly rotating them, but it is a non-destructive and programmatic way, and especially for me as a software engineer, this is my preferred method of doing this kind of stuff. So let me first clean up our scene a little. We don't need this plane anymore, so I'm just going to my bottle, Alt-P, clear parent. Now I can remove this plane and all of the modifiers. We're back to our single bottle with cap and label. Okay, we can ignore the boxes here and these empties. That doesn't matter. Now let's go into maybe front view, switch off the transparent view, and now we have to go over here. You know what? I'm also going to switch to this view over here. Bring up this, go over to animation nodes, and I'm going to create a new node tree. As per usual, I switch off always and switch on these three options, like I always do in my videos. Like I said, check out my other videos. Animation nodes is really, really awesome. So, what do we need? First of all, I want to create a matrix distribute. What is that? Well, this node creates a bunch of positions. Remember the array modifier? We had 5 going on the x and then 5 going on the y-axis. So this creates a grid of, let's do the same thing, 5 and 5 divisions on the x, the y. We don't need anything on the z, and we only have 1. The width and the length is that square that it distributes these 5 by 5 positions inside. We can't see anything up here, so we have to imagine it. We have a grid, 5 by 5 grid that is 5 wide and 5 deep, and we divide it by 5 and 5. So now we have 25 positions here. Now we want 25 bottles. So take an object instancer. We want to instance the bottle. Where is it? Bottle? How many instances do we want? Well, 25. I can just plug in this in here, and animation nodes gives me a get length node. So we now have 25 instances, 25 bottles, and we can actually see them in the outliner here, because we are really instancing objects like you would get if you select the bottle and then hit Alt D. That's what this node does. I can collapse this because we know that stuff is in there. So animation nodes puts all of its things into its own collection in here. Now we have 25 bottles, but they're not at those locations yet. We just duplicated or instanced 25 bottles at the same location. So we need an object transform output. We want to transform those 25 objects. So this node can take either a single object or a list of objects, which is what I'm doing here. And where do I want to transform these 25 bottles to? To X and Y, this location. So this is a really simple setup. We have 25 bottles. Now we can start fine-tuning things a little. For example, the width 5 is quite a lot, so we can squish it in this way a little, and we can squish it in. Whoops, that was the wrong thing. I wanted to take this one like this. Now we have our 25 bottles again. We can already see that there's a problem. We don't have the stickers or the caps. Now, it would be really easy if we could just switch on copy full object here or deep copy. But I noticed that animation nodes, at least for now, because all of this, Blender 2.8 and animation nodes is still heavily under development. So doing this crashes Blender. So instead of doing that, we're just gonna duplicate our object instancer 2 more times. So we again want 25 and 25. Here we want to instance the cap. Oops, cap. And then where's the label? And here, this one is the label. So we now have 25 bottles. 25 caps, 25 labels. Sadly, we have to set this up like this for now, and we need those locations. You know what? I'm gonna hit Shift and put a node in here. Move this node here, and then, whoops, can't see it. Okay. So now we should have, oh, there is an oopsie. Okay, we have 25 labels, but the caps are down here. And that is because this cap is not at the same origin as the bottle. But of course we can fix that quite easily. We take the bottle, we go to snap cursor to selected. So now the cursor is at the origin of this bottle. Now we take the cap and go object set origin to 3D cursor. Now the bottle has the same origin as the cap, or the cap has the same origin as the bottle. And now we get 25 caps in the right locations. Okay, let's go over here. Give it a quick save, switch over to cycles renders, and again we have 25 bottles. But we don't have any of that random stuff that we actually wanted. So let's do that. First up, let's move each bottle randomly left, right, forward and backward a little. How can we do that? Well, we have the locations here. These are the perfect locations. And instead of these perfect locations, up here we're going to create a vector, and there should be a random vector here. So we want a list. That's why I'm switching on this little toggle here. We want a list. We want those 25 random vectors. And we take the original list of vectors and then take vector offset. Okay, so we take our, where is it? Our original list of vectors, and we offset those 25 vectors with these 25 vectors, and now use those for the location. I can just plug that in directly for this location and this location and this location. Now I don't need this node anymore. Okay, now this is a bit of a mess, but it's working. We're displacing or transforming the X and the Y, and not the C, because we don't have the C switched on here. But this, of course, is a bit much. So let's turn down the scale to 0, which gives us our perfect matrix, and then slowly turn up the scale here. So if we look at it from the top, we get this. And we can also change the seed here if we don't like this setup. What we're really looking for is that they shouldn't be crashing into each other. So we just want a little bit of a random offset that makes it look more like somebody placed the bottles by hand. Okay, we have that. Now we can still see our original bottle. Remember, the 25 bottles, caps and labels are in here in this group, but this is still visible. We should switch off this render toggle here, so we don't when we render it out, we don't have this our base bottle in our rendering. So now we have 25 random locations, which is nice. Looks more real. Now for the rotation, random rotation, the same thing. We create, in this case, let's just create a random number. Again, we don't just want one, we want a list, so we switch this on. How many do we want? 25. Now we want rotation on the C, so we can switch on the rotation C on our object transform output nodes. You know what? I'm just gonna do it for the label actually. Maybe the label and the cap, but I don't need to rotate the bottles because they're a perfectly round, symmetric thing. Rotating them is not going to change anything. So, but I can't plug a number into a rotation, so I need to take rotation, combine Euler, use degrees, plug that into the C like this, and then we rotate our caps and our labels. Now we don't really see anything yet, and that is because we don't rotate a lot. We only rotate from 0 to 1 degrees. So now let's generate some interesting random numbers like -20 to +20 degrees. And looking at our labels here, each label now has a bit of a random rotation. Again, we can change the seed here to get a different set of random numbers. But you can see they're all rotated randomly. Now maybe this is quite a bit much, so -10 to +10. You know, it doesn't look like a robot placed them, but they're still facing forwards, just a little bit off at the location and also the rotation. So this looks much more realistic if we set up a different lighting and a different camera now. All of this is, like I said before, non-destructive. We can go in, we can change stuff. We still have our original bottle. We can always hide those 25 bottles if we don't want them in our scene. We can simply go in and change the X and the Y divisions, or the width and the length here, if we don't want 25 but just 15. And we click 2 times here and we have 15 bottles, randomly translated a little and rotated a little. This is why I love animation nodes. This is all non-destructive, all programmatic, because this is basically a way of creating a program to create and modify objects in Blender. Now, as a little bonus tip, let's say we want to put our bottles in a grid that is more space efficient. For example, we would place bottles in here instead of having the grid, you know, a perfect grid like this, we would actually move every other row over a little, and then we can squish more in. Now, how do we do that? Now we're getting into some advanced animation node stuff, but that is awesome. Well, easiest thing I think is to simply duplicate this matrix node. So now we have 2. And we take this list of vectors. We, for example, offset this list of vectors a little bit on the x. Now we still can't see anything happening because we're not doing anything with this. Now we have 2 lists of vectors. Now we take a list combine vector, take this list and this list. Now we have a new list to go in here and also in here. Okay, yep, we're getting there. So now, first of all, we take our first list and take them apart a little. Now we take our second list, maybe simply copy this length in here, and then we offset this on the y and the x. Okay, we have to make a little more space. Well, you get the idea. The rest is fine-tuning to get these 2 lists aligned. And now we have this sort of a more random, more space-efficient placement of our bottles. All done in animation nodes. If you prefer to use matrices, here I have a screenshot of an animation nodes node tree for the same thing. And using this technique, you can create an image like this one. If you want to see more Blender or animation nodes tutorials, then you can start by visiting chrisp.zone. This was a longer tutorial covering some basics and more advanced workflows. I hope you found it educational or at least informative. If so, please hit the thumbs up and subscribe. Check out all the other videos on my channel. Thank you for watching. Chris P out.